I'd like to begin today's session with an embodied devotion, because part of what we're going to learn about trauma today in the next 2 weeks is this isn't just in our spirits or in our minds. It's something in our bodies. So I thought a body awareness devotion would be helpful. So I invite you to be comfortable, to maybe release any tension you have sort of in your legs, in your hands right now, and just feel the chair that you're in, feel your bottom on the chair, feel your feet on the floor. Take some deep breaths. If you'd like, close your eyes or open them just slightly, perhaps. I'm going to lead you through a body scan that asks questions of each part of your body, which you are invited to answer silently within. Again, take another breath or two. Consider your legs. How do you stand in the world? How do you walk in the world? Draw your attention now to your pelvis. What are you giving birth to in the world? And your belly. What nourishes you? Your chest and heart. Whom do you love? And feel your back against the chair. What are you carrying? Be aware of your arms. What do you embrace? And feel your throat right now. What wants to be spoken or sung? And finally, your face. What is the face you show to the world? Consider now your entire body. What is your body trying to teach you? What questions is your body asking? And what are your body's invitations? And we come back together now as you're willing and able into this circle of friends. Back in the spring and summer, when Annie K. Taylor, Paul Van Zuden, Jeff Braun, and I were thinking about Sunday morning spiritual enrichment at WCC, we were thinking about, well, what have we all been through? And what will our needs be, our spiritual needs be, when we regather, at least hybrid for the first time in September? And first we thought about celebration. So we did a couple of weeks just to note what we have to celebrate. And then we thought, let's go a little deeper and consider what we've been through. Now, what we've been through is a broad topic. It's what we've been through as individuals, not only the last 18 months, but in our lives, and what we've been through not as individuals only, but as communities. I became aware the last year or so that there's a lot of focus on trauma as a lens to understand life, to understand personalities, and to give us a path forward to greater healing and community. And I began to hear about trauma-informed ministry, trauma-informed therapy, trauma-informed education, trauma-informed care. And I thought, there's something there. And I don't even know what the there is yet. We're going to find out these 3 weeks. Nancy Meislon, one of our church members, heard Melissa Lorraine on WBEZ. She's the director of Theater Y, and said, we need to have her come to WCC and talk about what she does with trauma through body movement. That got me thinking, or we could extend it for a couple of weeks and look at it from some other angles. So we invited a therapist today, and that is the Reverend Katherine Watkins. Welcome back. And Katherine is a therapist at Samara Care Counseling, with whom our congregation has a close relationship. And she's the United Church of Christ pastor and a member of First Congregational Church in Evanston. So she's going to speak as a therapist today, but to be aware of trauma, again, when a lot of us as individuals have been through some kinds of trauma in our lives. If this conversation should trigger for you some very unsettling feelings or experiences, feel free to speak to me today or tomorrow. Let me know how this is working with you personally, how this is affecting you. But in terms of group experiences, going back to 9/11, 9/11 was a trauma for every caring, feeling human being in the world, and certainly for Americans and New Yorkers, those in Pennsylvania and DC, in the military. It was a trauma. It was a collective trauma. And so has been things like the pandemic. What about the election of Donald Trump? For those who were not happy about that. How about the election of Joe Biden, who some people are still saying actually was fraudulent? From their perspective, this has been traumatic. The events of January 6th. There are sometimes, and then we think we're through with the pandemic, and here comes Delta. You know, like, oh, we're done with that. Oh, no, we're not. I think there's kind of a traumatic sense among us that is shared. It's not just individual, but it's communal. So we think there's a lot here to learn about, not only how to help others, but how to deal with our own sense of terror and that feeling, how to describe it when the rug is pulled out from under you and your world feels like it's just coming apart. So with all of that as introduction, Reverend Katherine Watkins, share with us.
Sure. All right, well, I'm going to, so Jeffrey had called and said, I don't know if this is anything you do. This is what I do. I'm very much a trauma clinician, and trauma-informed work is not just how I approach therapeutic work. It is the lens through which I see the world and engage with the world. So I could do this for like 3 days straight before even getting to like material I had prepared. So what I actually had in mind for today, my allergies hit me in the fall, so apologies. What I'm actually going to try to attempt to do today is only talk for, just introduce some concepts, probably only do the like me talking stuff for, I'm going to shoot for like 10 minutes and then just have a discussion and dialogue. We can talk about specific examples. We can talk about global examples. We can talk about trauma-informed therapy. We can talk about trauma lens in the world. I don't think that it is possible to be a decent trauma clinician without also being an activist and looking at systemic and global issues. So, you know, for me, things like Black Lives Matter movement is absolutely very much inherently tied to the work that I do. So, you know, when he's like, will you come talk about trauma? I'm like, I'm gonna need a little more, bringing that in a little bit. So I'm going to sort of dust the top of some key terms, some things like that, and then just open it up wide. And, you know, if I had my way, I'm like, come on, we can stop the introduction now. Because, like I said, I can do all of this without even getting to prepared material. So I tried to write down a few things to keep me on topic. I mean, it's all the same topic, but to keep me in a direction that would be helpful. Please feel free to ask questions. I prefer, you know, whether it's a hand raise or just, you know, if people have time so we're not all talking over each other. But aside from that, this is all about dialogue. Yeah, I wrote down some things so that I don't go off like in every direction, but we'll see. Okay. I think one of the most important places to start is with the word trauma itself. What is trauma? So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of mental disorders, anything you could possibly be diagnosed with from a therapist or a doctor, but in terms of mental disorders, is in this giant purple, this edition is purple. And then this is just the coding desk reference. So anything you could possibly have is in here. And the way that it defines, it doesn't exactly define trauma, but under post-traumatic stress disorder, you have to have an exposure to an actual or threatened death, serious injury, sexual violence, or one or more of the following: direct experience with a traumatic event, witnessing a person or an event, learning about the event, experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to adverse details of the traumatic event. Yes, those are the things that the DSM says are trauma or traumatic. I think it's a very incomplete definition. I'm going to try to chug some water and dribble all over my mask. Wow. Couple different definitions that I have very much used. There's a fantastic clinician on the North Shore in Evanston who runs an incredible center who defines trauma as too much input, too much stimulation without enough resources to manage. So to think of it in that context, it could be anything from, let's say you have a car accident. All of this stuff is happening so quickly. You see another car coming, threatened, you can't brake, you can't stop it, you can't get, you're in your seatbelt, you can't get out, all of those things. It's too much, too quickly, without things like how would you cope with that? Run away, get out, tell the car to stop, all those things that you can't do. So a traumatic event would be too much stimulation without the ability to cope, respond, fill in the blank. I like that definition. I would add more to it. One of the very, very important pieces of defining something as traumatic that I think is essential and I would like to highlight is a sense of helplessness. Okay, so a traumatic event like a car accident or a natural disaster, you can't do anything about it. When our bodies experience a threat, we go into an autonomic response, fight or flight, or freeze, play dead. That one, I'm sure you guys have heard about that. In a traumatic event or a situation, that is arrested. We can't do it. We want to fight back, but we can't. In abuse situations, you want to fight back, but you can't. In a child abuse situation, something's not right, but I don't know what it is. I can't figure it out. I can't get out of it. That is something that creates trauma. One of the other key pieces for me, in addition to the helplessness, is that something that is traumatic, in order to remain traumatic within you, usually it results in some kind of altered either sense of self or sense of the world. Think about combat veterans who start questioning, what is the right thing? Did I do the right thing? Am I ethical? Am I not? There's usually a heightened fear response in some way, even if it's just situational, like the car accident. If you hear a car horn honking, it's like, oh, but there's some kind of distrust or fear that has been created, either in a specific or global situations within the world. Victims of child abuse are oftentimes afraid of certain adults or certain types of adults. There is another kind of subset of trauma called complex trauma, and that's sort of my niche and specialty. And that is a prolonged developmental exposure, prolonged exposure during the developmental process. And it could be it doesn't have to be physical or sexual abuse. Things like neglect, which isn't necessarily someone specifically doing something. It's actually a bunch of people not doing things. But what it does is it alters usually a child's or a person's sense of self. Like, I must be doing something wrong, or I don't deserve to be loved, or I don't. So that's one of the key pieces of trauma for me. How you define trauma can only be defined by the victim and or survivor. Okay. If coming in here this morning and the owl not working right, we're over here going, cool, yeah, I'm gonna chat with my neighbor. And Jeffrey's like, I can't do this, it's not right, it's not going well. I brought this person in here and it's not going well, they're gonna think I'm blah, 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 blah. So that could have been a traumatic experience for him. He doesn't have to claim, how you wanna define it is up to you. And if he wants to say that was a traumatic experience, maybe if he doesn't want to claim trauma itself or whatever it might be, that can only be up to him. We can't sit here and say, dude, I was fine. Okay, get over it. So that's like what not to do. But understanding trauma itself and how it can exist from very specific and minor situations to much broader and horrific situations. Things like 9/11, incredibly traumatic. How traumatic they were, all of it was, really depends on the person, you know. And interestingly enough, for 9/11, I was actually back in the same place I had been 20 years ago for it. So I made a point to go to like the buildings that I was in when I found out, and it was different. It was so interesting because I think I was, 20 years younger. You know, I knew it was a huge thing, but during a traumatic experience, we definitely process things very, very differently. So, you know, giving time and space for however you may react is one of the key pieces of trauma-informed care. If you're freaking out a little bit, because I'm like, hey, everyone has trauma kind of all the time. Don't worry about that. Having a traumatic experience doesn't mean you will then be traumatized. If there are good ways, if you have the resources to cope with, it may not end up something that is disordered. All of the stuff in here, almost all of them say disorder at the end of them. You know, and this is the way I explain this is the way I understand diagnosing and how I explain it to all my clients. Everyone has some kind of like anxiety, depression, you get nervous about certain things, or sad for, you know, extended periods of time sometimes. What makes something a disorder, so you've got like, I'm never ever nervous at all, and like I can't ever not be so anxious that I can't even see straight. This is a spectrum, okay? The disordered part is just this end of the spectrum, right? Disordered, for something to be a disorder, it has to impact daily living in various categories, like, you know, 3 of 5 categories: school, work, occupational, home, social. There's a bunch of them. It's the same thing with trauma and trauma reactions. If you've had a traumatic experience, even if it's tough to deal with, you may not necessarily be in the disordered end of the spectrum. So, I mean, y'all are welcome to come to therapy anytime, but I'm not saying that like, well, let's all go now. Let's have, you know, big group trauma therapy. But I think it's helpful to understand how, you know, it's just like physical illness. If you cough once, does that mean you have a cold? Does that mean you're sick? If you cough 3 times, like where's the cutoff to being sick? Right? So there's like coughing is a spectrum. You once, and then like bronchitis or more. There is a whole spectrum, and where you end up going to a physician, that's up to you. Some people go for, you know, some people have to be on their deathbed to go see a doctor. Some people are like, 3 coughs, that's my limit. I think the same is true for seeking mental health professionals. It's on a spectrum somewhere. Some people, and where your spectrum lies, that's all individual. Just like the trauma stuff, no one can define for you what is too much, not enough, things like that. Cool. Okay. Trying to make sure I'm staying on track because we're getting 10 minutes. So what does trauma-informed mean? Well, it means taking all that into consideration. One of my favorite definitions of trauma-informed is shifting the question from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. Okay. Dude, Jeffrey, why are you acting like that? Versus, what's going on? Are you okay? Oh yeah, the owl was stressing me out, blah, blah, blah. Oh my gosh, yes, that was stressful, and blah, 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 right? Trauma-informed parenting is awesome, 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 awesome. Trauma-informed care specifically looks at, definitely changes the question when it comes specifically to clients, as opposed to like, to why are you like this versus to what happened? How did we get here? I like using these questions for some fairly benign examples so that we're not singling anybody out. Sorry, Jeffrey. Have to do with, so I foster dogs, and having a trauma-informed sort of approach to them is really helpful. I mean, it's not told all the way helpful because they can't tell me what has happened. But so I had this puppy, you know, 6 months. Oh my gosh, she would not stop barking. She just did like, I don't even know how she like took a breath. I don't think she ever took a breath. The second I would come down in the morning, even my dog was like, make it stop. And there were definitely days when I was just like, shut up. But to look at her and think, what is wrong with you? Why? Stop it. What's your problem? To understanding that she is so excited and cannot contain herself. And in what ways has she not been able to be excited before? I don't think that she was not leash trained. I don't know if she'd ever actually been taken outside, because she would actually go outside and then she'd come inside to pee. It was very annoying. But to look at that through the lens of, oh, poor baby, she's trying hard to do what she thinks is right because she's gotten in trouble for other things before, right? So it's not like, oh, why are you trying to be a pain to me? How did we get here? And that's how I approach a lot of, dogs when you first get to know them. And I'm saying this a lot about dogs because it helps with humans. To be like, oh, what? Look at someone who's scared. It's okay. I'm going to let you approach me on your terms. I'm going to sit on the couch tonight. And actually for the first week, we try not to really approach the dogs. So I was sitting on my couch that first night that I had her. She jumps on the couch and she's licking my face. I'm like, so this distance thing isn't going well, is it? But it's about letting her approach me when she is ready. Because come on, tell me. No, seriously, what was going on? What's going on? You're having an attitude. Fine, you just don't want to talk to me. But really, he still just might be really stimulated and overwhelmed by the stress of trying to get Owl to work. And by me putting pressure on, dude, it's not helping. Right? So trauma-informed shifts this a lot. You have to look at the interpersonal and situational. And as I mentioned a minute ago, institutional absolutely matters. Institutional systemic, I'm going to try to say this in short sentences because I can very much get so boxy on this. Things like Black Lives Matter movement, movements to decolonize the mind, anti-colonial approaches, these are all trauma-informed. And they're incredible movements. And in order to understand them as well as our place in them, we have to be able to really look at privilege, what privilege is, and how all of it intersects with our own lives. I'm going to hand out it's small, you don't have to read all the things. I can email out a PDF, but just some things to be able to have, because I've said a lot of things in a short period of time. Let's go to that way. The things, there should be extras at the end. At the bottom of the page, there are things that say, there are 5 principles to, I don't know who actually created the 5 principles, but they're pretty uniformly accepted. But the 5 principles to being trauma-informed and engaging in a trauma-informed manner involve safety, choice, empowerment, collaboration, and trustworthiness. And it's all on here. And yes, I'll email it to you.
To those on Zoom, I will send you this resource tomorrow.
I can email it to you today. I have the PDF.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you can look up a lot more about this. And I like I said, we're just sort of skimming the surface. Safety, everything from, if I'm harassing Jeff about, come on, tell me, that's not safe for him. If I'm approaching this puppy and trying to pet her and she doesn't want it, that's not safe for her. Choice, right of refusal, always right of refusal. Again, that's why we let the dogs approach us. They're allowed to walk away anytime. That's why I have a fenced yard. Right of refusal. If I say, Jeffrey, tell me about it, blah, 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 he is always allowed to say, not today, not right now. Clinically, if I'm working with a client who constantly says no, then I'm going to ask them, what are we doing? Why are we here? In not so many words, but always right of refusal, whether we're talking about a traumatic situation or not. Hey, Katherine, how's your family? Not today. I don't want to talk about that. Okay. Why? What happened? How about that's a boundary? No. Empowerment. Trauma survivorship is not about what happened to you. It's about how you survived it, actually. And I'm so serious. One of the many abusers have a traumatic past. And when people choose to respond to their trauma with love and kindness, as opposed to harming others, that's not because of their traumatic history, it's because of their resilience. So it's always about empowerment. This is particularly true for, if we're gonna look at not even clients, people of color existing in this world, this very white world. People with queer or non-binary identities. It's really, really hard to exist in this, no offense, cis white male world. Empowerment. Collaboration. This is how I do my treatment plans. I don't say, here are the things you're going to work on. What do you want to work? Why are you here? Why are we doing this? What are you interested in doing? And sometimes, they'll spit out something that I'm like, it's not really something I do, but we'll keep talking about it. What do you want to work on? I mean, it's like when a physician says, well, here are 3 drug options and physical therapy option. What do you think? As opposed to, here, you will take this. Report back in 6 weeks. Providing clear and consistent information. Consistency, consistency, consistency. So that someone knows that they can come to you with something and they'll know what kind of reaction they're going to get. I've had clients come to me about saying, being embarrassed or worried about sharing something that they're unsure about or they have shame about. And a lot of times it goes really well because they'll say something and I don't blow up. Even if it's concerning, we'll discuss it. But it's like realizing that you can share something without being shamed for it. So that was more than the 10 minutes I promised. What else did I have here? Trauma-informed means doing a lot of self-work. There's so much check your privilege involved, and absolutely, language and words matter 100% of the time. And particularly as privileged suburban white people, some of the terminology, sentences, ways we talk about things, I'm saying we as like the me generic, not everybody has to claim my identities, but so much of what I learned growing up in terms of how we speak are not helpful use of language. So I've worked long and hard to shift not just words that I use, but how we invite people to engage in conversation with us. So I would just encourage you guys to stay everyone to stay super open-minded about changing the way you approach things. Not homeless people experiencing homelessness, particularly in the mental health field. I think a lot about, oh, my schizophrenic client. Yeah. My client who's been struggling with that diagnosis, just to name a few examples. There are 100 ways we could go. Trauma in COVID, trauma in the body, trauma in colonialism, trauma in Christianity, trauma in so much. I'm trying to dial this back just so that I can let you guys ask questions, do some talking, and if it's total crickets in here, I'll keep going. I've also brought some books that are some really cool examples. One thing I do want to mention is that we haven't talked much about this, but trauma is stored in the body, and it's not. Traumatic memories are untrustworthy for several reasons. One is that when our body is in fight or flight, parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, you get the 2-minute version of this. When our bodies detect a threat, we go into fight or flight, right? Which is a physical autonomic response, physiological. And in order to, because, we evolved we are mammals, but we evolved from as we were animals and running in the desert. So when the zebra is hanging out at the watering hole and it sees a lion or a tiger or whatever eats zebras, it goes into run, right? So heart starts racing faster. Blood goes to protect the core organs as well as gets you ready to just run. Right? Things like your eyes dilate. Pinpoint hearing. What goes offline? Digestion, reproduction. Don't care about digesting your hamburger, run, you fool. Certain parts of your brain go offline as well. Not just logical thinking, but that also includes long-term memory processing, which is why a lot of people report traumatic events in only like snapshots or in smells. Not all of our senses are being processed in the typical way in which, it's actually right here, these sides, it's not the temporal lobe, but it's inside a little bit more. That kind of goes offline because your brain doesn't care about memory making. It's just run, you fool. And so even though, but that's part of what creates that helplessness. On 9/11, we watched again and again and again these, reels of planes going into buildings, and we're just like, what do we do? I mean, that's been so much of COVID. I'm a very relational person. I engage with other people a lot. I love to talk and to tell. And all of a sudden I'm told that other people are dangerous. I have to stay away from them. But now I'm allowed to go out and hang out with people again. But I don't know you. You can stay over there. Right? Like this is traumatic in the sense that I don't even know how I can define space anymore. How do we define personal space? I don't think it was totally, I don't think it's totally coincidental that I ended up taking space on these chairs. I think I felt a little safer doing it. It wasn't conscious, but I think it made me feel a little safer. And if someone came and sat down here, I think I'm at the place where, but certainly before vaccines were a thing, I would have been like, we're here. Air travel has been very interesting. I have two beloved grandparents who are still alive, and I try to go see them. I have sworn since I've been vaccinated that I will go see them every month. But my flight down in September, the guy in front of me was refusing to wear a mask, and I was so mad, and I said something to the flight attendant, and he wouldn't do anything. And that was traumatic because I couldn't do anything about it. And I'm so scared, they're vaccinated, but they're 95 and 97, and I will not bring something to them. But here I am, and then this guy's not doing this, and he's also complaining about the removal of Confederate statues. So, we were having a great time to begin with. So I was like, can we just duct tape him to the chair? I've seen those videos. But there's a helplessness to that. And I'm like, I'm following the rules. I'm doing the things. I'm wearing the mask, not even taking sips. And Mr. Privilege over here is barking. Now, granted, I was flying into Richmond the day they removed the Robert E. Lee statue, so it wasn't, I know, I was like, what am I doing? But that helplessness and thinking about how vulnerable and at risk I am, and no one would do anything about it. And it's like, my mom was like, but it's the law. I'm like, you're telling me. So anyway, yeah, I'm getting around that. Oh my goodness. Part of, and this is why, trauma counseling is so important. Part of why that is not something that I hold, that it's still obviously it bothers me a bit, but some one reason why it doesn't keep me up at night is that I have safe places where I'm able to tell stories like that. I'm able to have cathartic moments when someone's like, see, you guys are like, oh no, and I'm like, thank you. It's like there are people out there that understand. These things are important. A book that's been mentioned a couple times, and I will kind of do a little show and tell with all these in a minute, but this one, if you're going to read anything about trauma, you read this book, The Body Keeps Score. I think it's The Body Keeps the Score, but I dropped the second the many years ago, and now it's just stuck in my head. Bessel van der Kolk, it is not an easy read. It's not textbooky, but it is intended for clinicians. There's a lot of science stuff in there, some like MRIs and pictures and things that, sections you can skip over. But this was absolutely groundbreaking research and a groundbreaking book. And it was published after 2000. So that is how new the field of trauma-informed work care is. And this is based on his work. He's an MD. He was working with a lot of Vietnam veterans. And so it's based on that and how he saw what was known as shell shock, which has evolved into PTSD, how there are physical differences in those patients. He did a bunch of studies there's one with dogs in crates, and there was a dog who, every time they tried to get out of their crate, they were zapped. And then finally, when the zap stopped, the dog still wouldn't go out of the crate. And that, to us, we can kind of figure that out now. But that was groundbreaking. That was the late 1900s. So this is very new stuff. This guy's still alive, and he's not that old.
The author again?
Bessel van der Kolk. This book is the book. I have several copies of it. I didn't bring my original copy because it's like this, but times 10. I mean, I think I flagged every page. I kind of have. There's really great stuff in here. Now it's helpful, you know, this much of it is notes, so you don't only have to read that much actually. Do you want me to kind of just name these books real quick before we open things up? Because I've lied about my 10 minutes already.
Sure.
Okay. Bessel van der Kolk, and I'll lay these out so you guys can come take a look at them.
How about passing them around?
Do you want to? I don't know how you guys are feeling about COVID. I am vaxxed. So I'm up for whatever. Now, why don't I do this? Why don't I lay them out on the couch when we're done and you guys can come, and you're welcome to touch them if you want to, but that way, right of refusal. I don't want anyone to be like, Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. This is a very hard read, but this is a lot of trauma work with young kids. Really good stuff. If you're keeping a list of books you should read, this goes a little bit lower. Age of Overwhelm. How on earth do we live in a world of chaos? Excellent, excellent read. This is the same author who did Trauma Stewardship. Did you ever read that? Mm-mm. Oh, man, you should read that. It's how to work. It's like caring for others in the midst of trauma and how you can manage your own stuff while caring for and helping others. It is super relevant whether you're doing ministry, chaplaincy, therapy, or even just trying to be a good activist. You know, how you work with your own stuff while engaging with all the trauma and chaos that's out there. It's the same author. Isabel Wilkerson's Cast. Yes.
We know that.
Absolutely phenomenal. What I love, and the reason I brought this book is because of how she languages things. I love subordinated caste versus dominant caste, as opposed to saying minority, because the majority of minorities, a lot of them are not minorities. POC are the global majority. It's just Americans who seem to think they're not, right? So women are actually a statistical majority, I think, much of the time, but it's very much a subordinated class or caste. So excellent stuff. An example of really amazing trauma-informed lens, New Jim Crow. Read it.
Michelle Alexander.
Yep. It'll kick your butt if you haven't read it. Read it.
Concerns.
This is about the incarceration and prison system in our country and the school to prison pipeline and how it was very intentionally created. Mass incarceration in the age of colorblindness. Yep. My Grandmother's Hands is another really great one about trauma in the body. And it does address police bodies as well, controversially, because it also takes a stand to have empathy for police bodies, and I had a really, really hard time with that. But it is brave enough to mention those things. But this is another very, very good book in terms of racialized trauma and how it is in the body. And it has specific chapters that address white people, and it has specific chapters that address people of color. So it's very well done. I will put all these out there. I'd say if you have a priority list, it should go Body Keeps Score, Grandmother's Hands, New Jim Crow if you haven't read it. I'd probably put Cast higher, but a lot of you nodded. So I would start with those.
Excuse me.
None of these are beach reads.
Yeah, could I suggest that maybe we make a list of those with your brief comments about them and then send them out afterwards
Sure.
to the
An annotated list?
Yeah, sure. We'll definitely start with this one. It is not an easy read.
Did you have another handout for us, Joe?
That's the survey. There's like a survey wants us to do a feedback form at the end.
Okay.
Is this recorded? If you don't,
it is recorded.
If you don't do it, they want to know. They want to know if I was decent at my job. So yes, I mean, like I said, I could talk about this stuff all day long, and I would love to, even if it's not necessarily questions, but even just dialogue about what this means. What does trauma informed mean? You know, it's a lens through which you see things. If it's a matter of taking a look at your Sunday bulletin and being like, wow, have we noticed that in the past 10 weeks, every composer listed on here is white? Or is it a matter of saying that, or whatever it might be, right? Are we using gender inclusive language? What is our accessibility like? Like, yeah, we know what ADA has to say. I mentioned, and I'll just sort of throw this in here, spiritual or theological trauma. Christianity, not Christ, but American Christianity has done a really good job. I would say Western European Christianity, but I'm going to speak as an American. And what I've seen has gotten kind of away from the original Jesus dude. And there are a lot of people who've been very harmed by red tape and politics of the Christian tradition. I feel like I'm preaching a little bit to the choir because this is a good place. And, you know, knowing Jeffrey and the kind of work that he does, I think I'm, like-minded folk. And there is a reason I am in the UCC and no longer in other mainline denominations. I probably shouldn't have gone to a Methodist seminary in the South. Whoops.
They needed you.
Well, I actually, all during seminary, I went to a Reconstructionist synagogue. I was just so mad at the church. Yeah, I was like, I'm going there. And I wanted nothing to do with the church, which is probably why it took me 10 years to get ordained. But seriously, you know, Jesus did so much cool stuff. There are a lot of these supposedly Jesus followers to whom I do not want to be affiliated. I have a very, very hard time with the symbol of the cross because how I feel like it's been hijacked on front license plates of SUVs that with guns in the back, right? Like
they might say they're Jesus followers.
Exactly.
But are they?
So, well, they actually knew. So a lot of this, but also understanding then what things like the symbol of the cross might evoke in other people who have struggled with it. That's why there's always right of refusal. You know, how do people want to be identified? As, you know, for example, I can think of a couple people in my head right now who I happen to know are married. So females who I happen to know are married to females. I don't know that they're lesbians. I don't know how they identify. They're in a same-sex relationship at this time. One of my really close friends, her late wife, always claimed, I'm not gay, I just really love Betsy. So it's like, it's not on me to tell her she is or is not, right? So part of trauma informed is to always let the other person define themselves for you. You're a blah, 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 blah. No, how do you know? What terminology people choose to use. That's everything behind what are your pronouns? Regardless of how you look or how you present, what are your pronouns? And the same is true for BIPOC. Even if someone looks a certain way, they may not claim those identities.
What were those letters?
BIPOC.
People of color, POC?
BIPOC is Black Indigenous People of Color. That's BIPOC is actually used a lot now. That's sort of the people of color category.
We are good with time. Thank you for that. Everything you gave us. In my list of sort of social things in the last 18 months, I did not include one of the most obvious, and that is the George Floyd murder, which, because of the day and age in which we live and the video that was captured,
all too commonplace right
now. It's again. So I throw that in there too. We're good with time. I'm going to open up to everybody who might like to make a comment, observation, ask a question.
Go for it.
So in my family, the phrase often used when someone was having trouble with some issue was just suck it up. Mm-hmm. Is there still a place in the world for just suck it up?
What do you mean? Are there still people that use that, or is it still appropriate in some places?
Is it still appropriate in some places to say enough already?
That I am done with, and I want to tell them to just get a grip on reality. But I don't know that that's ever helpful. I think about my little nephews who can have meltdowns for nothing. They're 5 and 3, so yeah. And it isn't just suck it up. It's what's going on. Yes, I know that's hard. We do still have to wear pants. you know, but it's not just suck it. I mean, you're telling them just suck it up, but in much more understanding language. I understand pants are frustrating. That's also the rule till we go for going outside. And there's empathizing involved in it. Tell me, and it's not telling someone to stuff their feelings. I understand it's frustrating, but it's so hot. I don't want to wear pants either. That's kind of the rule though. We can't go outside without pants on. Does that not? It's just,
well,
it
yeah,
seems.
I was just going to comment that there's so much trauma involved in everybody's life. We spent all this time trying to understand and try to get them to talk about it. We'd never move on to anything. It seems like, you know. I'm not saying it very well, but it's like, okay, come on, let's go.
Yeah, if we're too busy dancing around everything, we're not going to get anywhere, right?
Right.
Like there's one of the really big pieces, and this is where I struggle with, and I'm going to say right wing, but it's pretty much anyone whom very much frustrates us. Probably for those of you who were at my one last year, the people were trying to figure out communicative language. It is still each and every one of our own responsibility to do our trauma work. And I've run into this with clients, particularly in couples or family sessions where one does not want to do the work and spends the whole time going, but I'm traumatized, you can't talk to me like that. And does, and sort of interrupts and prevents progress by dwelling on that. Well, I have trauma. Okay, what are we gonna do about this?
Yeah.
And using that, oh, I have, but I can't. But my guy won and I'm not over it. Well, you do need to put on your big girl pants and figure out how to move on with life. But we don't say it in that way, right? Like it is still, and I try very hard not to have this argument with my dad every time I see him, but because he still wants me to be the obeying daughter, right? And I'm like, no, I'm not coming to whatever this thing is that, you know, whatever, we want to have this dinner. No, I don't, I have a life, I'm busy. And he'll just be like, you need to get along with your mother. And that's his favorite line. And that's because he doesn't want to deal with the repercussions, right? But me trying to just even tell him, and I don't say no, screw them, we're all, my family's close. But what I will try to say is your discomfort when she and I are in an argument is not the reason that I should shut up. Like you got to deal with your discomfort. And I understand that it is hard. I want to tell him to suck it up.
Yeah.
But instead, the trauma-informed and the helpful, or even just the empathic and productive communication way of saying that would be, I understand it's hard, but that's your piece to deal with. I will support you in it, but I will not do it for you. I understand you so badly need to think and believe that Trump won. I understand that that is paramount to how you view the world. And deal with it in not so many words. And that's not where I am. And actually, that's not even what statistically the results are showing. You know, I will be mindful of that and sort of tiptoe around the topic, but I'm not taking down a Biden flag or fill in the blank, whatever it is. So I get what you're saying, where if we spend too much time going, oh, but can I even say hello to you? Is that okay? Are you too traumatized for hello? Or, you know, we do end up not really getting anywhere.
Right.
That's where the own self-work comes in. I have tons of stuff that will often trigger me, and also have figured out a lot of different ways, some in big ways, some in small ways, have figured out ways to engage with the world. There are some times where I have to say, I did walk out of a family dinner last week because it did get too much. But also, I keep going to them and I do my own work so that I can say, happy birthday, Mom. Like, this is whatever day. It was her birthday last week. That's where we are. So it's both and. I hope that helps a little bit. I know we had other hands, so I don't want to dwell too much, but you're not wrong. But the term isn't suck it up. Even if that's what you're thinking in your head, because I've so been there. And I really there are so many times I want to be like, put on your big girl pants and like do something. But we don't phrase it that way.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Someone else.
Well, I was just on that, had to do with what Paul said. I run into it, and I feel like that I am thought of as being self-indulgent if I am told to suck it up, because I'm so self-indulgent that I can't relax.
Say more.
Yeah, I know I'm confusing. I always confuse people.
I didn't say that. I'm asking for more.
Right. I guess I'm the mother of 4 boys, and they don't get it. They don't understand me.
Okay.
So I'll give them an idea, and they won't even listen.
Okay.
And my ideas, I feel, are really broad and applicable, and they don't see it.
Okay.
And so I feel like I'm being self-indulgent. I drop it. Does that have anything to do with what we're talking about, sucking it up?
You're welcome to say to them, hey, I have great ideas that I would love to share with you, but it doesn't sound like you're interested in them. I'll keep them to myself if you don't want to hear them. But it is really hard for me to share what I think are great ideas and have them be rejected. It makes me feel like you're not interested.
They would laugh at me.
Then I would say, why are you laughing? Because that's shaming.
Oh God, by the way, I'm used to it.
Yes, but just because you're used to it does not mean that it's necessarily like a socially appropriate response.
Yeah.
If they laugh at you, what are you laughing at? I actually had a good idea.
Well, now they understand that language.
Right, but that you can say, if me trying to help you, is that a joke? Because that's hurtful. You don't have to say you're wrong, but you can say, X hurt me.
I'm not sure.
But I'm saying that's an option. There's a difference between, screw you guys, I'm not talking to you anymore. And it's hurtful when I'm laughed at for giving you an idea. I get told a lot, my dad loves, speaking of my dad, he loves to be like, oh, get over it, you're too sensitive. And I really want to say, oh, who's being too sensitive now? You're the one with your panties in a wad. You don't say that. I have a very hard time, when I'm in an argument, I have what's going on in my head, and then I'm like, filter. No, what were you going to say? Is that not on the list of empathic things to say?
It's all good. I want to be mindful of time.
Oh, yes.
And the fact that we do have a couple minutes.
Okay.
And I would like to give people on Zoom at home a chance to be heard and ask a question if you would like.
We haven't forgotten you.
We have not forgotten you. Betty, you're on mute.
All right, I was just this entire section. I think this entire, even starting, this is strange, I'm getting an echo. I keep getting an echo. All right.
We hear you okay.
All right, I'll forget about my half of the echo. Even starting out with your going through the body with all that, I felt that was very helpful, and it just kept getting better, and so many things to think about during the week. I just think it's been a wonderful session. I really have enjoyed it a lot. I've had a couple things lately that have kind of upset me, and I know that they'll go away, and so that's fine. But just a loss of a good friend and that kind of thing. But it was, I appreciate all the views from every possible part of the session.
Good. Thanks, Betty. Elizabeth, Andrew, or anybody else in the room have a final question or comment, especially for Elizabeth? Yes, Losie?
This week, the sister of my relative who refuses to take the shot died of COVID. She was 50, very overweight, was only 2 weeks in the hospital. She was so heavy that they couldn't turn her over for breathing to help her. The combination of refusing to take care of her health seems to be equivalent to a fixed set of thoughts in this queen of the family do not have shots. Seems to be a wall beyond which any kind of traumatic situation can't penetrate for communication about trauma. If they are traumatized, there's still a wall that puts the brakes on even a verbal thing. And on the phone this week with my niece, who is with shots, we were saying, too bad my niece doesn't have shots. But when I found out from another conversation this week about this, that the hospital apparently didn't go to extremes about the word giving her painkiller or something like that. My niece went off on a tangent about that, said they should do everything, and I'm thinking, with the nurse that I talked to last night, which now the nurses are angry because people are coming in 90% unvaccinated, and the nurses are exhausted for a year and a half. And combine talk with a nurse late last night, and my niece earlier today saying they should do everything. The nurses are doing everything. And with this kind of traumatic situation, back and forth, there are walls beyond which you cannot get through.
Typically,
just a quick response.
Yeah, extremely frustrating. Yes, and I'm sorry for all that you have to deal with in all of this. Yes. What I will say, and this is sometimes a piece of empathy with which sometimes I struggle as well. When you have rigidity, particularly rigid thought processes, they typically have been born out of what once was a traumatic event. I talk about, changing how you engage with the world. A lot of people will put up walls full of lies on which they'll build their lives. Very
intellectually based.
Oh yeah. But the lies could be anything from global to just like, no, I'm a good mother. Now it's frustrating when you are dealing with the repercussions of that. But you're right, there is no getting through that because you can't, it's like a house of cards. If you get them to admit to one thing, the whole thing falls down. So the rigidity is very, very difficult, and boundaries are essential. It's darn near impossible to have a conversation with logic, for sure.
Katherine, thank you for introducing this topic. Thank you. And yes, Katherine does come to us on behalf of Samara Care Counseling.